She spent her entire life afraid of touch, as if love were a punishment. He was a millionaire who promised kindness, but hid old and dangerous obsessions. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. Andrew Lawrence carried on his shoulders the weight of an empire built on precious stones and well-paid silences. At 32, he commanded the largest jewelry company in the country from a century-old mansion in New York's Upper East Side, where each room whispered stories he preferred to forget. To Time magazine, he was America's most coveted and mysterious businessman. To the New York Times, an eccentric genius who had transformed the family business into an international powerhouse. To his employees, a polite, fair but impenetrable boss who shaped sapphires with surgical precision. What no one knew was the story of his sister Grace, nor of the locked office on the third floor of the mansion, where a portrait framed in silver rested before a fireplace that hadn't been lit in 20 years. Andrew didn't live, he controlled. Each calculated step, each measured gesture, each contained sigh to keep memories in captivity. He didn't love, didn't trust, didn't surrender. He seduced with precise glances, touched with fingers that knew exactly where to find others' vulnerability, and then withdrew like someone who touches a flame only to feel the heat, never to get burned. Routine was his golden prison. He woke at 5:30, ran along the riverside when the city still slept, showered in silence, and wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than an economy car. At the office, he led meetings with the precision of a conductor, closed million-dollar contracts with firm handshakes, and returned to the mansion before sunset, always alone. Isabel Morgan was 22 and carried in her body the rigidity of a religious upbringing imposed like a straitjacket. Daughter of Catherine, a woman obsessed with spiritual purity, and a father who had disappeared when she turned 15, she had grown up in the dark hallways of a boarding house in the Lower East Side, wearing blouses that hid curves and reciting prayers that crushed desires. She had never been touched with tenderness. She had never allowed herself to look into a man's eyes long enough to arouse any suspicion or sin. She carried in her chest the certainty that loving meant falling into temptation, that desire was betraying sacred teachings, and that the world was a minefield of spiritual traps, not a place of possibilities. She wasn't naive, she was conditioned, intense by nature, but imprisoned by circumstances. She worked part-time at a community library in the Central District and spent her afternoons serving meals at a social support center coordinated by the Sacred Heart Church, where her mother had forced her to volunteer since she was 16. Was there, among soup pots and tired faces of those needing a hot meal, that Isabel found some purpose? She liked listening to the stories of the regular visitors, smiling at children running between tables, feeling useful. Even though, deep down, she knew she was there more by maternal imposition than genuine vocation. The encounter happened on a rainy Tuesday in March, during a charity event organized by the Lawrence Foundation at the community center. Andrew had attended out of social obligation, bored with yet another occasion where he needed to smile for photos and sign checks to soothe the conscience of New York's elite. He wore a discreet gray suit and an expression of polite indifference while greeting organizers and posing for flashes that didn't interest him. Isabel was serving lunch with mechanical gestures, her brown hair tied in a tight bun, wearing a long-sleeved white blouse that made her look older than she was. She was carrying a heavy tray with bowls of soup when she tripped on a fold in the carpet. The hot liquid splashed on her own hands. She lost her balance, and that's when he appeared. Andrew caught her with both hands, like someone rescuing precious porcelain at the limit of a fall. The touch lasted only 3 seconds, but for her it was like lightning striking from her neck to her feet. For him, something much more disturbing, an echo from the past, an instinctive recognition. There was something in those large, frightened eyes that reminded him of Grace, the same purity marked by pain, the same fear of breathing too loudly and drawing attention. "Are you okay?" he asked with a voice softer than Isabel expected from such an imposing man. She nodded yes, but her hands trembled as she wiped the splashes on her blouse. He remained there, watching every movement with an intensity that made her feel naked. Even though fully dressed, Andrew couldn't forget those eyes. For the next 3 days, He found himself thinking about the girl from the community center, while analyzing financial reports or participating in video conferences with investors from Hong Kong. There was something about her that disturbed and attracted him at the same time, a mixture of fragility and contained strength that awakened instincts in him he had preferred to keep dormant. On Thursday, he returned to the social center under the pretext of checking how the foundation's resources were being applied. He arrived at the end of the morning, when he knew she would be serving lunch. Isabel recognized him immediately and felt her stomach tighten. She was wearing the same white blouse, but this time there was a small tomato sauce stain on the sleeve that she had tried to hide without success. "Can I help you with that?" offered Andrew, discreetly pointing to the stain. She blushed intensely, murmuring apologies that he interrupted with a gentle gesture. "I have a trusted dry cleaner. I can have someone pick up the blouse today." Isabel shook her head negatively, but something in his voice made her want to accept. It was the first time a man had offered to help her with something so mundane, and his kindness disarmed her. "It's not necessary, Mr. Lawrence. It's just an old blouse anyway." "Andrew," he corrected. "And every blouse deserves care when it's worn by someone who cares about helping others." The compliment caught her off guard. No one had ever praised her for her volunteer work, not even her mother, who saw it all as Christian obligation. Into you. The following days, Andrew began to appear at the center with a regularity that drew attention. Always polite, always discreet, but always present. He brought small gifts for the kitchen, special seasonings, quality ingredients, new utensils. He said it was investment from the foundation, but Isabel noticed that he directed the gestures specifically to her. One afternoon, when she was alone organizing the pantry stock, he appeared with a cup of tea. "Chamomile with honey," he said, offering the drink. "I saw that you don't drink coffee." She accepted, surprised. She didn't remember mentioning this to him, but somehow he knew. The tea was at the perfect temperature, sweet in the exact measure. "How?" "Did you—" "Andrew, no, I don't like coffee," she asked, genuinely curious. He smiled, a small and controlled smile. "I observe it's a professional habit." The answer intrigued and frightened her simultaneously. What kind of observation was that? And why did she feel so seen, so important under that penetrating gaze? From then on, the meetings became more frequent and intimate. Andrew always arrived at the end of her shift when there was less movement. They would sit at a small table at the back of the hall and talk about books, about the city, about small dreams that Isabel had never confessed to anyone. He had the gift of making her talk, of extracting opinions and desires from her that she didn't even know she possessed. "Have you ever thought about traveling?" he asked one of those afternoons, absent-mindedly stirring a teaspoon. "Where to?" She laughed, as if the question were absurd. "I barely know New York properly." "Anywhere. Paris, Rome, Buenos Aires. Places where you could be whoever you wanted to be." The question disconcerted her. Isabel had never imagined herself being another person in another place. Her life had always been so small, so controlled, that the idea of reinvention sounded almost sinful. "I am who I need to be," she answered, repeating a phrase she had heard from her mother dozens of times. Andrew studied her for a long moment. "But not necessarily who you want to be." The observation followed her throughout the night. Lying in the narrow bed she shared with her mother in the Lower East Side boarding house, Isabel wondered who she would be if she could choose. The question was both liberating and terrifying. The following week, Andrew appeared with a gift, a book of poetry by Emily Dickinson, with a soft leather cover and yellowed pages that smelled of old paper. "I thought you might like it," he said, handing her the volume. "There are some markings in the margins. I hope you don't mind." Isabel flipped through the book with reverent care. On the marked pages, she found passages underlined in blue ink. "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tunes without the words, and never stops at all." In the margin, an elegant handwriting had noted, "For someone who has yet to discover what it means to be free." That night, for the first time in years, Isabel cried, not out of sadness but from an emotion she couldn't name. It was as if Andrew saw in her someone she didn't know herself, someone who deserved poetry and freedom and gestures of affection. For the first time in her life, she felt desired not for what she should be, but for what she could become. The Sigi. Following weeks brought a subtle but profound transformation to Isabel's routine. Andrew didn't court her in a traditional way. He didn't send flowers or invite her to romantic dinners. Instead, he created moments of intimacy almost imperceptible, a hand that slipped to hers when handing a cup, a gaze that lingered a few seconds, longer than socially appropriate, words whispered so softly that she had to lean in to hear. "You have pianists' hands," he commented one afternoon watching her fold paper napkins. "Delicate but firm." Isabel looked at her own hands, calloused from housework and marked by small kitchen cuts. "I've never played piano," she responded, embarrassed. "But you could learn," he said, with a certainty that made her believe in possibilities she had never considered. "I have a Steinway at home. It's been silent for years, waiting for fingers to awaken it." The suggestion hung between them like an unspoken promise. Isabel felt that he was inviting her to something far beyond piano lessons, but she couldn't exactly decipher what. There was a constant tension in the air when they were together, as if they were walking on the edge of a precipice that both pretended not to see. One night, when she was leaving the community center later than usual, she found Andrew waiting outside. It was drizzling, and he was holding a black umbrella that barely protected them from the wind. "May I drive you home?" he offered, pointing to a discreet Mercedes parked at the corner. Isabel hesitated. Accepting a ride meant crossing an invisible line she had always respected. It meant admitting she felt something for him, something that went far beyond gratitude or admiration. But the rain was intensifying, and there was something in his expression that prevented her from refusing. The journey to the Lower East Side was made in silence, but a silence charged with electricity. Andrew drove with one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on the gear shift, too close to her leg. Isabel felt her heart racing every time he changed gears, when his fingers accidentally brushed against her skirt. "Stop here," she requested, 2 blocks before the boarding house. She didn't want him to see where she lived, didn't want the reality of her humble life to break the enchantment of those moments suspended in time. Andrew obeyed, but didn't unlock the doors immediately. "Isabel," he said, turning to look at her directly. "You know something is happening between us, don't you?" She lowered her eyes, unable to sustain the intensity of his gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Andrew," he corrected her softly. "And yes, you do. You feel the same as I do." She didn't deny it, and that was answer enough. "I would like to get to know you better, really, without the limitations of the community center, without curious onlookers." "I can't," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why not?" The simple question disarmed her. Why not? Because her mother had taught her that men like him weren't interested in girls like her with good intentions. Because there were 20 years of difference between the worlds in which they lived. Because she had been raised to believe that happiness was sin. "Because we're too different," she finally said. Andrew smiled, a smile that carried sadness and understanding. "The best connections happen between different people. Sameness is comfort, Isabel. Difference is growth." She left the car without responding, but her hands were trembling when she opened the door of the boarding house. Catherine was waiting. For her in the small living room, praying the rosary with the fury of someone trying to ward off invisible demons. "Where were you? It's almost 9 o'clock, her mother reprimanded, without taking her eyes off the crucifix on the wall. "At the community center. I had to stay later to organize the stock." "Don't lie to me, Isabel. I smelled men's cologne on you." The accusation came loaded with decades of distrust and religious fanaticism. "What man is this?" Isabel felt her face burn. "No man, Mother. Mr. Lawrence from the foundation gave me a ride because it was raining." "Lawrence?" Catherine finally stopped praying and turned to her daughter. "The jewelry-rich guy, Isabel, for God's sake, what nonsense is this? Men like that don't give rides to girls like you out of kindness. They want only one thing. Her mother's words echoed in Isabel's mind throughout the dawn. Was it true? Was Andrew just playing with her, feeding fantasies that would never materialize? Or was there something genuine in his glances, in the way he pronounced her name, in the delicacy with which he treated her? The next morning she decided to keep her distance. She arrived at the center later, avoided the main hall where he usually appeared, concentrated on kitchen work. But Andrew found her anyway. He always found her. "You're avoiding me," he said, leaning on the pantry door where she was organizing. "Cans of preserves. I'm busy." "Isabel, look at me." His voice had a tone of soft, irresistible command. She obeyed against her own will. "If I did or said something that bothered you yesterday, forgive me." "You didn't do anything," she replied, but her voice sounded distant. Andrew moved closer until she could smell his cologne, a mixture of sandalwood and something indefinable that made her think of old books and summer rain. "Then why are you running from me?" "Because my mother is right," she finally said. "We are from different worlds. This can't work." Andrew's expression hardened for a moment, as if she had touched an old wound. "Your mother doesn't know me," he said with an intensity that scared her. "And she doesn't know you either. Not the woman you could be away from here." Andrew's phrase echoed in Isabel's mind for days. "The woman you could be away from here." The words carried a promise and a threat at the same time. Promise of freedom, threat of change. And change, she had learned since childhood, was always dangerous. But curiosity was stronger than fear. The following Friday, when he invited her for coffee at a bakery near the center, she accepted. It was a simple place with formica tables and the smell of fresh bread coming from the oven. But Andrew seemed completely at ease, as if he frequented places like this every day. "You're not what I imagined you would be," she confessed, stirring the sugar in her coffee. "And what did you imagine?" "Someone more arrogant, distant. The rich people who appear on television always seem to look at us as if we were invisible." Andrew smiled, but there was a shadow in his eyes. "Perhaps because I know what it's like to be invisible too. In a different way, but still invisible." Isabel didn't completely understand what he meant, but something in his voice made her not ask. Instead, she let him tell her about his routine, about the weight of carrying a famous surname, about the expectations that had suffocated him since childhood. It was strange to discover that someone with so much money and power also felt trapped. "And you?" he asked. "Tell me about your family, about what your childhood was like." Isabel hesitated. How to explain the years of mandatory prayers, the scraped knees from kneeling so much on the cold church floor, the constant feeling of sinning, just by existing. "My mother is very religious," she finally said. My father abandoned us when I was 15. One day he was there, the next he had disappeared." "And how did you feel?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked how she had felt about her father's abandonment. "Relieved," she answered, surprised by her own honesty. "He drank a lot, yelled. My mother became more controlling after he left, but at least there was no more fear." Andrew extended his hand across the table and briefly touched her fingers. The contact lasted only a few seconds, but was enough to send waves of heat up Isabel's arm. "You deserve much more than that," he said. "You deserve to be happy without feeling guilty about it." The words followed her throughout the weekend. Monday, when she arrived at the community center, Andrew was already waiting for her with an unexpected proposal. "I need someone to organize the private library in my office," he said. "The books are in a terrible mess since the former assistant left. Would you be up for helping me?" Isabel knew she should refuse. Going to his house, being alone with him, was crossing all the lines that her moral education had drawn. But the prospect of seeing his private library, of touching books that probably cost more than her annual salary, was irresistible. "It would only be during some afternoons," he continued, as if sensing her hesitation. "And I would pay for the work, of course." "You don't need to pay me," she said before she could contain herself. "I like books." The smile he gave her was the most genuine she had ever seen. "I knew you would." The next day, Isabel took 2 buses to reach the Upper East Side. The Lawrence mansion was even more imposing than she had imagined. 3 floors of classical architecture, impeccable gardens, and a wrought-iron gate that seemed to protect century-old secrets. A uniformed employee led her to the library on the 2nd floor, and she almost lost her breath. The walls were covered with mahogany shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with books in English, French, Spanish, and Italian. There were first editions of Hemingway, complete collections of classical poetry, art history treatises that seemed to have come out of a museum. In the center of the room, a study table in walnut and 2 green leather armchairs. "It's impressive," she whispered when Andrew appeared at the door. "It was my grandmother's," he explained, watching her move through the shelves with bright eyes. "She used to say that a house without books is like a soul without memories." Isabel ran her fingers along the spines of the volumes, feeling the texture of leather and fabric, breathing in the smell of old paper and accumulated knowledge. "Have you read them all?" "Most of them. Some several times." Andrew approached her, picking up a volume of poetry by Walt Whitman. "This one, for example. I read it whenever I need to remember that life can be beautiful." He opened the book to a marked page and read in a low voice, "We were together. I forget the rest." His voice transformed the verses into something intimate, almost like a personal declaration. Isabel felt a shiver run down her spine. "It's beautiful," she murmured, unable to look away from him. "You are beautiful," he replied, so quietly that she almost didn't hear. And then, for the first time, Andrew touched her face. His fingers traced the line of her cheek with a delicacy that made her close her eyes. Involuntarily, "I promised to go slowly so as not to hurt you," he whispered, and there was so much care in that promise that she felt tears forming behind her closed eyelids. When she opened her eyes, he was closer, so close that she could see golden reflections in his eyes. For a moment she thought he would kiss her. She wished he would kiss her, but Andrew only rested his forehead against hers, breathing heavily, fighting against some internal impulse. "You have no idea the effect you have on me," he said, moving away with difficulty. "But I don't want you to feel pressured. I want you to be sure." Isabel didn't know what to respond. Sure of what? That she wanted him? She already was. That she was willing to face the consequences? That was more complicated. That he really cared about her, or just saw her as another conquest? That was the doubt that corroded her from within. The following days transformed into a delicate dance between approach and withdrawal. Isabel began working in the library every afternoon, cataloguing books with a meticulousness that impressed Andrew. He would appear with tea at the right time, watching her work for a few minutes, sometimes touching her hand when giving her a heavy volume, but always maintaining a respectful distance. It was on a Thursday that she found the first diary. She was reorganizing a section of American literature when a black-covered notebook slipped from between 2 volumes of Steinbeck. It wasn't a common book. The pages were filled with delicate feminine handwriting, in blue ink faded by time. The name on the first page made her freeze, Grace Lawrence. Isabel knew she should close the diary immediately, return it to Andrew, and pretend she hadn't found it. But curiosity was stronger. The first entries were from an ordinary teenager, complaints about piano lessons, descriptions of family parties, comments about books and movies. But as she advanced through the pages, the tone changed. "Andrew has been strange with me lately. He keeps watching me in a way that makes me uncomfortable. When I ask if everything is okay, he changes the subject. Mom and Dad left for Rome. Andrew insisted that I not go with them, said that someone needed to take care of the house, but we have staff for that. Why does he want me to stay? He came into my room last night, said I was having nightmares. Hands screaming. I don't remember dreaming about anything, but I found the door unlocked in the morning when I always lock it before sleeping." Isabel felt her stomach contracting as she read. The entries became more spaced and disturbed. Grace described a constant feeling of being watched, of losing small personal objects that later reappeared in strange places, of waking with the sensation that someone had been in her room. I tried to talk to Andrew about going away to study. He got furious, said that family must remain united, that the world is dangerous for a girl like me. But I'm not a child, I'm 19. I found photos of me that I never knew had been taken. I was sleeping in some of them. Andrew said it was he who took them to preserve beautiful moments. What brother does that? The last entry was just one line written in trembling handwriting. I need to get out of here before it's too late. Isabel closed the diary with trembling hands. What had happened to Grace? Andrew had briefly mentioned a sister who had died young, but never gave details. The pages she had just read painted a disturbing picture of obsession and control. Found something interesting? Andrew's voice behind her made her jump in fright. He was standing at the door of the library, but his expression was different from usual. Colder, more calculating. His eyes fixed on the diary in her hands. I'm sorry, she stammered, trying to hide the notebook. It fell from between the books. It wasn't my intention to read. But you read it anyway. It wasn't a question. Andrew approached slowly, extending his hand. May I have it back? Isabel handed over the diary, but couldn't avoid asking, What happened to your sister? The question hung in the air like toxic smoke. Andrew stored the diary in a desk drawer and turned to her with an expression that mixed pain and something she couldn't identify. Grace was fragile, he finally said. She had mental problems, paranoia, hallucinations. The diary you read is fantasies of a disturbed mind. She seemed very lucid in the first pages. Lucidity and madness can coexist for a long time before one consumes the other. The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Grace killed herself, Isabel, jumped from the third-floor window on a winter dawn. We found the body in the morning. The revelation hit her like a punch. I'm so sorry, she whispered. That's why I don't like talking about her. It's a wound that never completely heals. Andrew moved closer and touched Isabel's face with the same delicacy as always. But you're not like her. You're strong, centered. You wouldn't let your mind play tricks on you. There was something in the way he said this that made her feel uncomfortable, as if he were trying to convince her of something, or perhaps convince himself. Isabel nodded yes, but a seed of doubt had been planted. That night, lying in her bed at the boarding house, she couldn't stop thinking about Grace's words. Were they really fantasies of a sick mind, or was there truth in those fears? And why? Did Andrew keep the diary if it was so painful? In the following days, she began to observe Andrew with different eyes. She noticed that he always knew exactly where she was in the house, appeared at the most unexpected moments, knew details about her that she had never mentioned. How had he known she didn't like coffee? How did he know she preferred chamomile tea? Why did he always bring books that seemed specifically chosen to affect her emotions? You're different, he commented on a Tuesday when he found her distractedly cataloging a history section. Distant. Just tired, she lied. Andrew studied her for a long moment. Isabel, you know you can trust me, don't you? If something is bothering you, I'd like to know. The irony of the question wasn't lost on her. How could she trust him when she increasingly doubted her own perceptions? Everything is fine, she insisted. But it wasn't. And when Andrew suggested that she spend an entire weekend at the house to accelerate the cataloging work, Isabel felt a chill down her spine that she couldn't ignore. I promised to go slowly so as not to hurt you, he repeated, using the same phrase from weeks ago. But this time the words sounded different. This time she remembered that Grace had also written about someone who promised not to hurt her, and who had still jumped from a window on a winter dawn. Isabel agreed to spend the weekend at the mansion, but not without first inventing an elaborate excuse for her mother. She said that one of the older volunteers at the community center had fractured her hip and needed care, that she would spend Saturday and Sunday helping the family. Catherine frowned, suspicious, but didn't question it. The room that Andrew prepared for her was on the second floor, close to the library, with a view of the internal gardens. It was elegant without being ostentatious. Light wood furniture, cream-colored bedding, a small bookshelf with carefully selected books. There was something familiar about the environment, as if she had been there before. This was Grace's room, said Andrew, standing at the door, watching her reaction. I hope you don't mind. It's the most comfortable for guests. Isabel swallowed hard. Sleeping in a dead woman's room would already be disturbing in any circumstance, But sleeping in Andrew's sister's room, after having read her diary, seemed almost like a profanation. "Are you sure you don't prefer to put me somewhere else?" "The other rooms are being renovated," he replied, but something in the answer sounded forced. Besides, Grace would like the space to be used by someone special. The word special echoed in Isabel's mind as she unpacked her small suitcase. She had brought only the essentials: clothes for 2 days, hygiene products, the Emily Dickinson book that Andrew had given her. Upon opening the dresser drawer to store her underwear, she found something that made her freeze. It was a set of black lingerie, lacy, clearly expensive, and clearly not left there by accident. It was folded with care, as if it were a gift waiting to be discovered. A small card was resting on the pieces: "For someone who deserves to feel beautiful. A." Isabel picked up the card with trembling fingers. The handwriting was Andrew's. She recognized it. But when had he bought that? How had he known her size? And why had he left it in the room as if it was something natural? A soft knock on the door startled her. "Isabel, dinner is served." She quickly closed the drawer, hiding the lingerie as if it were evidence of a crime. "Coming." Dinner was served in the intimate dining room, not in the main hall. A small table, lit candles, porcelain plates that looked like family antiques. Andrew had exchanged his suit for more casual clothes, tailored pants and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, revealing strong forearms and hands that she already knew by heart. "You're tense," he observed, serving wine in a crystal glass. "Is something wrong?" How to? Explain that finding intimate lingerie in the room where she would sleep made her feel like a doll being prepared for a game she didn't understand. "Just not used to so much elegance," she finally said. Andrew smiled. "You get used to it. Elegance suits you. How can you know? You've barely seen me outside those community center clothes." "I see more than you imagine," he replied, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him more closely. "I see the way you move your hands when you're nervous, how you tilt your head when you're concentrating, how your eyes shine when you talk about something you love. I see the elegant woman that exists beneath the simple clothes." The description was both flattering and disturbing. Andrew observed her with an attention that went far beyond normal, cataloguing gestures and expressions like a scientist studying. A rare specimen. The wine made her more relaxed, and the conversation flowed through diverse topics. Books they had both read, places they would like to know, childhood memories. Andrew was a skilled storyteller, could make her laugh with anecdotes about eccentric jewelry clients or embarrassing situations at business dinners. "You have a beautiful laugh," he said at one point, watching her over his wine glass. "You should laugh more often." "I don't have many reasons to laugh at home," she confessed, surprised by her own honesty. "And here? Do you have reasons here?" The question carried a load of meaning that she didn't feel prepared to unpack. "Yes," she admitted, in a low voice. "Here I feel different." "Different how?" "Lighter. As if I could be who I really am, not who I was taught to be." Andrew leaned across the table, taking her hand in his. "Then stay," he said simply. "Don't go back to that boarding house, to that small life that doesn't suit you. Stay here with me." The invitation hit her like lightning. "Andrew, I can't. My mother, my work." "Your mother doesn't value you, and the volunteer work you could continue doing, but with more resources, being able to help more people." He gently squeezed her fingers. "Think of the possibilities. You could study music, literature, art, travel, know the world beyond central New York." It was a tempting proposal, too seductive to be real. "And what would you gain from this?" she asked, trying to maintain some rationality. "Your company, your presence illuminating this house that has been empty for so long." Andrew brought her hand to his lips and kissed her fingers with almost religious reverence. "You have no idea how lonely it is to live surrounded by luxury, but with no one to share it with." Later, when she retired to her room, Isabel spent a long time observing her reflection in the antique mirror. Would it be madness to accept Andrew's proposal, or would it be the chance to finally live the life she had always dreamed of, but never dared to desire? She opened the drawer again, looking at the black lingerie. For a moment she imagined herself wearing those pieces, imagined how she would feel, powerful, desirable, free. But then she remembered Grace's words in the diary, and a small voice in her mind whispered that perhaps freedom was just another word for a golden prison. She fell asleep with this doubt, without noticing that on the other side of the wall, Andrew remained awake, watching the discreet monitor that showed him every movement she made in the room that had once belonged to his sister. Isabel woke with the strange sensation of having been watched during sleep. The morning light filtered through silk curtains, creating golden patterns on the high ceiling. But there was something in the air that left her restless. She got up and went to the window, observing the perfectly maintained gardens of the mansion. It was then that she noticed a figure standing near the main gate, a middle-aged man, grey hair, wearing a dark coat despite the morning heat. He seemed to be looking directly at her window. When she blinked and looked again, the man had disappeared. Breakfast, Andrew was especially attentive. He had personally prepared a table on the veranda overlooking the garden, fresh fruits cut in flower shapes, still warm artisanal breads, homemade fig jam. He wore an impeccable white shirt and smiled with a satisfaction that seemed disproportionate to the occasion. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, serving coffee in a hand-painted porcelain cup. "Yes," she lied. "Andrew, did you see any strange man in the gardens this morning?" "There was someone standing near the gate." His expression subtly altered, just an almost imperceptible tensioning of the muscles around his eyes. "It must have been the gardener. He comes early on Saturdays to take care of the rose bushes." He didn't look like a gardener. He was well dressed, in a coat. "Isabel." Andrew leaned across the table and touched her hand. "You're nervous. It's understandable. It's the first time you've slept away from home without your mother. The mind can play tricks when we're anxious." The explanation sounded reasonable, but something in the way he looked away bothered her. Isabel decided not to insist on the subject, but mentally filed the image of the mysterious man. The rest of the morning passed organizing rare books in the library. Andrew worked beside her, his fingers occasionally brushing against hers when, passing heavy volumes, his masculine cologne creating an atmosphere of intimacy that made her lose concentration. At one point, she climbed a ladder to reach a high shelf and felt his hands rest on her waist to ensure her balance. The touch sent waves of heat throughout her body. Andrew didn't remove his hands immediately. He let them remain there, warm and firm, while she pretended to look for a specific book. When she finally descended the ladder, he was so close that she could feel his breath on her neck. "Isabel," he whispered, and there was something different in his voice, more urgent, more needy. "Do you know what you're doing to me?" She turned to face him and for the first time saw genuine vulnerability in his eyes. "What am I doing?" "Making me feel alive again. Making me want things I swore never to want again." He raised his hand and caressed her face with a delicacy that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. "Since Grace, since I lost her, I closed myself to any possibility of love. But you, Andrew, let me finish." He breathed deeply, as if preparing to jump from a precipice. "I know we are from different worlds. I know my life, my wealth might scare you. But I also know that between us exists something real, something that neither you nor I can deny." Isabel felt her heart racing. It was the moment part of her had been waiting for and part of her had been fearing. "I feel that too," she confessed, "but I'm afraid." Afraid of what? How to explain that she was afraid of him, that the pages of Grace's diary had planted seeds of doubt that grew with each possessive gesture, with each inexplicable knowledge he demonstrated about her. Afraid of getting hurt, afraid of not being enough for you. Andrew smiled, a smile that mixed tenderness and something darker. "You are more than enough, you're perfect." He gently pulled her against his chest, and Isabel felt the solidity of his body, the heat emanating from him. "And as for getting hurt, I already said. I promise to go slowly, so as not to hurt you." The phrase echoed in Isabel's mind like An alarm bell. They were the same words she had read in Grace's diary, the words that apparently hadn't prevented his sister from jumping from a window. But before she could completely process the discomfort, Andrew kissed her. It was a gentle kiss at first, almost reverent, as if she were made of crystal. But when Isabel responded, when her lips parted under his, something changed. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, more possessive. His hands entangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she felt all the control he maintained over himself beginning to unravel. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Andrew rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes as if fighting against some internal impulse. "Sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to be so intense." But Isabel had liked the intensity. For the first time in her life, she had felt, desired with a passion that went beyond kind words and polite gestures. "Don't apologize," she said, surprising them both with her boldness. Andrew opened his eyes and studied her for a long moment. "You really don't know what you're saying," he whispered. But there was something predatory in his smile. "You don't. If I know what you awaken in me." Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. Andrew moved away immediately, the mask of control returning to his face. "Must be a delivery," he said, but Isabel noticed that he seemed genuinely surprised. Minutes later, he returned with a somber expression. "It was for you," he said, handing her an envelope with no return address. "Someone must have discovered you're here." Isabel opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was just a photo, her and Andrew at the bakery coffee shop, taken without them noticing. On the back, a handwritten phrase, "She wasn't the first, she won't be the last. Leave while you can." Isabel's blood froze. "Who would do this?" she asked. But when she looked at Andrew, she saw that he was observing the photo with an expression that mixed anger and something very much like fear. "Someone who wants to separate us," he finally said, taking the photo and tearing it in half. "Someone who can't stand to see me happy." But Isabel had seen the expression on his face, and for the first time since she had met him, she was absolutely certain that Andrew knew exactly who had sent that message, and that he was lying to her about it. The rest of Sunday passed in palpable tension. Andrew became even more attentive, but Isabel perceived that it was a vigilant attention, almost possessive. He didn't leave her alone for more than a few minutes, always appeared with some excuse when she moved away. A special tea he had prepared, a book he wanted to show her, a question about the cataloguing work. When the time came to return home, Isabel felt divided between relief and disappointment. Part of her wanted to flee from that atmosphere loaded with secrets, but another part couldn't deny the magnetic attraction she felt for Andrew. He drove her back to the Lower East Side in the Mercedes, and during the entire journey kept one of his hands on her thigh, an apparently affectionate touch that she interpreted as possessive. "Think about what we discussed," he said when they stopped near the boarding house. "About you staying with me, about the possibilities we can build together." "I'll think about it," she promised, but her voice sounded less convinced than she intended. Andrew pulled her into a goodbye kiss that lasted longer than would be appropriate on a busy street. When he finally released her, he whispered in her ear, "You are mine, Isabel. Maybe you don't know it yet, but you are." The words followed her through the dawn. Lying in the narrow bed beside her mother, who slept deeply, she couldn't stop thinking about Andrew's declaration of possession. It hadn't been "I love you" or "you're special to me." It had been "you are mine," as if she were an object to be possessed. On Monday, she arrived at the community center, hoping that the normal routine would help her organize her thoughts. But Andrew appeared at the end of the morning, as always, only this time he brought with him a man she didn't know, someone middle-aged, well-dressed, who observed her with disconcerting curiosity. "Isabel, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Jack Miller, my personal lawyer," said Andrew with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "He's helping with some foundation matters." Jack extended his hand to greet her, but his grip was firmer than necessary, and he held her for a few seconds too long. "Very pleased, Miss Morgan. Andrew talks a lot about you." There was something familiar about that man, something that made her think. Suddenly she remembered. It was him. The man she had seen in the garden of the mansion the previous morning. She was sure. "Did you already know each other?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "No," Jack replied quickly, but his eyes said otherwise. "Although I have the impression I've seen you somewhere before." Andrew interrupted before she could respond. "Jack needs some documents about the social projects we support here. Could you show him the file we organized?" It was clearly an excuse to leave them alone, and Isabel realized this immediately. But she also realized that it might be an opportunity to discover more about the mysterious man. While they pretended to look for documents in a small back room, Jack turned to her with a serious expression. "Girl, you need to get away from Andrew before it's too late." Isabel's heart raced. "Why? Who are you really?" "I was the Lawrence family lawyer 20 years ago. I knew Grace since she was a child." He looked at the door, making sure they weren't being heard. "She came to me 3 days before she died. She was terrified, said that Andrew was controlling her, watching her, that she could no longer distinguish between reality and paranoia. But Andrew said she had mental problems. Grace was perfectly sane when she came to talk to me. She brought evidence, photos, recordings, a diary detailing months of obsessive behavior." Jack took Isabel's hand. "She asked me for help to leave the country, to hide from him. I was preparing the documents when she died." Isabel felt as if the floor was disappearing beneath her feet. Did she really kill herself? "Officially, yes, but I always had doubts. Grace was hopeful, making plans for the future. It wasn't the profile of someone contemplating suicide." He breathed deeply. "And you, girl, are frighteningly similar to her. Not physically, but in your manner, your energy. Andrew has a type." "What are you suggesting?" "That he looks for women he can mold, control. Grace was too young to resist when it began, but she grew up and wanted her freedom. That's why he chose you, someone older, but equally vulnerable due to your repressive upbringing." Jack's words echoed the suspicions she had been nurturing. "Why are you telling me this? Why did you risk coming here?" "Because I have a guilty conscience. I should have helped Grace more quickly, should have ignored the legal protocols and simply taken her out of the country. I won't make the same mistake twice." Before Isabel could ask anything else, the door opened and Andrew appeared. His expression was controlled, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "Did you find what you needed?" he asked, but his eyes moved between them as if he could read the secrets they had shared. "Yes," said Jack, returning to his professional tone. "Miss Morgan was very helpful." After Jack left, Andrew approached Isabel with exaggerated gentleness. "Did he ask any strange questions? Jack is sometimes very curious about my personal friends." "No," she lied. "He just asked about the Foundation's projects." But Andrew was studying her with that familiar intensity, as if he could see through her lie. "Isabel," he said softly, "I hope you know you can trust me. If someone says something that confuses or worries you, I want you to come talk to me first, before jumping to hasty conclusions." The way he said this, like a warning disguised as a request, made her realize that he knew exactly what Jack had told her, and that his careful reaction was in fact a veiled threat. That night, Isabel made a decision. She needed to know the truth about Grace, about Andrew, about what had really happened in that family, and the only way to find out was going back to the mansion and finding evidence on her own, even if it meant putting herself in danger. The following Wednesday, Isabel told Andrew that she would like to finish cataloguing the library that week. He seemed satisfied with the suggestion and offered that she spend a few nights at the house to accelerate the work. She accepted, but this time with a plan. During the day, she worked normally in the library, but observed everything with new eyes. She noticed that Andrew always knew where she was, even when he was supposedly in meetings in the first-floor office. She noticed the discreet cameras in the corners of the rooms, which she had previously assumed were just normal security systems. She noticed that certain doors always remained locked, especially one on the third floor that she had never tried to open. At night, during dinner, she managed to get Andrew to drink more wine than usual. He became more expansive, more affectionate, and also more careless. When they went to the library for a final work session, She pretended to be more interested in him than in the books. "Andrew," she said, approaching him while he consulted a catalogue, "can I ask you something about Grace?" He stiffened slightly but tried to disguise it. "Of course." "Were you close?" "Very close. She was special to me." There was genuine pain in his voice, but also something more possessive. "After our parents died, I became responsible for her. Perhaps I was too protective." "How so, too protective?" Andrew turned to face her, and for a moment she saw something dangerous glittering in his eyes. Grace was naive, easily influenced. There were people who wanted to take advantage of her, of our wealth. I just wanted to keep her safe. What kind of people? Gold-digging men, false friends, even house staff who tried to manipulate her. He moved closer, touching her face. "Like you, Isabel, you're also naive, also need to be protected." The comparison made her freeze, but she forced a smile. "Protected from what?" "From the world. From people who don't understand what we have together." His hands moved to her neck, in a caress that could be romantic or threatening. Grace didn't understand this. She thought protection was prison. And was it? The question escaped before she could contain herself. Andrew stopped caressing her and studied her for a long moment. "You're asking a lot of questions about my dead sister," he said, with a coldness that made her involuntarily back away. "I'm sorry, it's just that you never talk about her, and I feel she was important to understanding who you are." "I am who you need me to be," he replied, pulling her against his chest. "You don't need to understand my past to build our future." But that night, after Andrew retired to his room on the 3rd floor, Isabel put her plan into action. She waited until she was sure he was sleeping, then sneaked out of her room with a small flashlight she had brought in her bag. The 3rd floor of the mansion was unknown territory. There were several rooms, but only one had a locked door, exactly. The one that her intuition said was important. Isabel examined the old lock and realized it wasn't as sophisticated as she had imagined. Using a hairpin, she managed to open the door after a few minutes of attempts. What she found made her understand why Andrew kept that room sealed. It was an office, but transformed into a kind of disturbing sanctuary. The walls were covered with photographs of Grace, some clearly posed, others taken without her knowing. There were photos of her sleeping, bathing, dressing. A table in the center of the room was covered with personal objects, jewelry, intimate clothing, locks of hair kept in small envelopes. But what terrified her most was discovering in a desk drawer photographs of herself, dozens of them taken over the past few weeks without her noticing. Isabel serving food at the community center, walking down the street, entering the library, sleeping in the room that had been Grace's. There were also copies of her personal documents, birth certificate, school records, even medical records that she didn't know how he had obtained. And in a corner of the desk, a folder labeled with her name contained what appeared to be a complete dossier, her habits, preferences, fears, dreams that she had naively shared during their conversations. With trembling hands, she opened a last drawer and found a diary, not Grace's but a new one, with her own handwriting meticulously copied. It was as if Andrew was writing her story for her, documenting thoughts and feelings that he imagined she should have. The most recent entry made her freeze. "Today, Andrew kissed me, and I realized I've always loved him. I want to stay with him, forever, away from my controlling mother and my small life. Only he understands me. Only he can complete me." She had never written or thought those words. Andrew was literally creating a fictional version of her mind, documenting a relationship that existed only in his obsessive fantasies. "I found you." Andrew's voice behind her made her jump in fright. He was standing at the door, wearing only a robe, but his expression was terrifyingly calm. "I knew your curiosity would eventually bring you here. It's exactly what happened with Grace." Isabel stood up slowly, trying to position herself to have an escape route. "Andrew, this is wrong. You need help." "I need you," he corrected, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "And you need to understand that there's no going back. You've seen too much, know too much, just like Grace. What really happened to her? Andrew smiled, a smile that was both sad and disturbed. She tried to escape just as you'll try. But Grace discovered that there's no place in the world where I can't find her. There's no escape from true love. This isn't love, Andrew. It's sickness. It's devotion, he corrected, slowly approaching. It's the type of love you women pretend to want, but run from when you find it. Total love, complete protection, absolute dedication. Isabel realized that he was blocking her only exit. The room had no windows. It was an internal room of the mansion. She was trapped with a man who had clearly lost his connection with reality. Please, Andrew, let me out. I promise I won't tell anyone about this. You don't need to leave, he said, as if she had said something absurd. You're home. This is your place by my side forever. And it was then that Isabel fully understood Grace's fate and what Andrew was planning for her. Andrew, please, said Isabel, trying to keep her voice calm while calculating her options. You said you loved me. If you really love me, you won't force me to stay against my will. Grace said exactly the same thing, he replied with a disturbing nostalgia. In the end, she understood she was wrong. You will understand too. What did you do to her? Andrew moved closer, and Isabel could see genuine tears in his eyes. I didn't want to hurt her, never wanted to, but she forced me. Tried to escape, tried to leave me alone in this empty house. His voice broke. She said she preferred to die than stay with me. So I helped her fulfill her wish. The confession hit Isabel like a punch. You killed her. I freed her, he corrected. In the same way, I'll free you if necessary, but I hope you'll be wiser than she was. Isabel felt a fury growing in her chest, a rage she had never experienced before. All her life had been controlled by her fanatical mother, by social expectations, by the fear of being who she really was. And now Andrew wanted to continue this prison, just painting it with more golden colors. No, she said, with a firmness that surprised her. I am not Grace, and you will not control me. Andrew seemed genuinely shocked by her resistance. Isabel, you don't understand. I can give everything to you. Luxury, security, unconditional love. Why do you insist on throwing that away? Because this isn't love, she replied, moving slowly toward the desk where she had seen a metal letter opener. Love doesn't need prisons. Love doesn't spy, doesn't manipulate, doesn't kill. You're talking like Grace talked in the end, said Andrew, his voice becoming more dangerous, full of modern ideas about independence and freedom. But see where that led her. Isabel managed to reach the letter opener without him noticing. It led me to the truth, and the truth is that you're a sick man who needs help, not a woman to possess. The word sick was like a trigger. Andrew lunged in her direction, but Isabel was prepared. She dodged and ran to the door, but he was faster, blocking her exit again. You won't leave here, he said, his mask of civility finally falling completely, just as Grace didn't leave. You both are mine forever. It was then that Isabel heard police sirens approaching. Andrew heard them too, and his expression transformed into panic. What did you do? I didn't do anything, she said genuinely. Confused. The answer came when the door of the room was broken down by armed police, followed by Jack Miller. The lawyer looked at the scene. Isabel cornered, Andrew blocking her exit, the walls covered with obsessive photos, and shook his head sadly. Jack, said Andrew, his voice returning to the controlled tone, what a surprise to see you here. I put a tracker in her car, Jack explained to the police, ignoring Andrew, and external security cameras to monitor the property. When I saw that she had entered this room and Andrew had gone after her, I called you. How you have no right to invade my property, protested Andrew, but his voice sounded desperate. I do when there's suspicion of kidnapping and murder, replied the detective. Mr. Lawrence, you're under arrest for the death of Grace Lawrence and the attempted kidnapping of Isabel Morgan. As they put handcuffs on Andrew, he looked at Isabel with an expression that mixed sick love and hatred. You don't know what you're doing, he said. Without me, you'll go back to that small, insignificant life. You'll regret it. "I prefer a small free life to a large imprisoned one," she replied, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. In the months that followed, during the trial that shocked New York, Isabel had to confront not only the traumas of what she had lived through, but also the guilt of not having saved Grace. Jack helped her process the emotions, explaining that she had done what she could with the information she had. The case revealed a disturbing pattern. Andrew had romantically involved himself with at least 3 other women in the past 10 years, all young and vulnerable, all who had disappeared when they tried to leave him. Grace had been just the first fatal victim. During the healing process, Isabel made decisions she had never imagined possible. She left the boarding house where she lived with her mother and rented a small apartment in the city center. She continued her volunteer work, but also enrolled in an evening literature course at NYU. She learned to drive, traveled alone to the coast, tried foods she had never tasted. For the first time in her life, she was discovering who she was when she wasn't being controlled by anyone. A year after the trial, she received a letter from the prison. It was from Andrew, written in a handwriting that she recognized from the disturbing imitations of her diary. The message was simple. "I still promise to go slowly so as not to hurt you. When I get out, I'll find you." Isabel read the letter once, then burned it in the kitchen sink. She no longer felt fear. She felt pity. Andrew would remain obsessed with a version of her that had never really existed, while she would continue building the woman she really was. That night, looking out the window of her small but her own apartment, Isabel realized that freedom wasn't the absence of problems. It was the ability to choose which problems were worth facing. And for the first time in 23 years, those choices were entirely hers. She had learned that true love didn't possess, didn't control, didn't manipulate. True love liberated. And now, finally free, she was ready to discover what kind.